Good evening, everybody. We have the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting tonight. General business we start out with. First order of business is to verify the meeting was properly posted. Mr. Clark.
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Next order of business is opportunities for citizens to speak. Are there any citizens that would like to speak tonight? Anyone out in the hall? Okay, no one here to speak tonight, so we can pass that part of it. Action items, approval of minutes for the April meeting.
So moved.
I second.
Okay, additional discussion. Okay, it's been motioned and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? No opposals. Motion passes 5-0. Approval of vouchers.
There were no voucher questions this month.
Mr. Como hasn't been feeling well.
Been busy.
Maybe Mr. O'Brien should ask a few questions now and then. Do I have a motion for approval of the vouchers?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ryanchek. Ms. Caffrey, additional discussion on vouchers? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Now to the exciting stuff, approval of the express agreement.
Yeah, last month, the committee took a look at what we thought was a near final draft. I did have some follow-up conversations, and I think we're really down to two language issues. Again, if you remember, the body of the contract's really not changing from the existing agreement very much at all. The first one was Article 9, the term. There's language in there about giving notice for the extensions and from 1 year down to 6 months. The other article is Article 14, where it was the number of scholarships, and they're fine with not less than 6. If you remember, they've been giving out, I don't remember the specific numbers, but it was like 10 to 15 scholarships a year, whether it's for lessons or for the competitive side of Express. So I don't think there's any issues there. They did also request in Article 13 the rent. They first asked that those rent payments be tiered up cash flow wise so they can get up and running and adjust for the higher rate. Then they came back and requested that it just be the same amount across the term of the contract. The dollar value is the same, $107,300 per year. I don't foresee that. Also under that article, I forgot to change, there's a date right above the table, the payment table. That was the old language where it was November, but the first payment under this agreement actually is February 5th of 2020. So that change would be needed. Otherwise, the financial terms haven't changed. I think we've talked about them a couple times. I have on the last page the difference between the current agreement versus what we're looking at now. And it includes $20,000 additional per year for maintenance improvements for the agreement. So if there's any other questions, otherwise I think we might have a deal here.
Questions? Take a motion. Mr. Como.
I move to approve the Swing Express agreement as amended with one date that
Change,
you put in there.
And I second it.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Como, a second from Ms. Voigt. Additional discussion on the issue? Mr. Como.
Just they've been a great partner. I think it's a fantastic program. You see some of the results with our children. Just accolades to what they're doing there. So keep up the good work, and glad that we can hopefully work on getting a new agreement for a number of years to come.
Okay, I guess we'll take the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
And just so I'm clear, this doesn't go onto the board, this is just, or does this get carried forward to the board, or does FNF have authority?
FNF has the fourth.
Okay, that's what I thought, I just wanted to make sure I followed through correctly.
We don't want to make Joe too busy on Wednesday
Char-
night.
Charter schools, so, are different.
Yeah, charter schools probably should be, yeah, I suppose, yeah. Next item, approval of e-Achieve contracts.
Rick's here again to, last month he gave kind of the status of eAchieve, and tonight we're looking for approval of their contracts as well. So I don't know if, Rick, you want to walk them through the information, and then we can answer any questions you might have.
Sure, yep. I provided a summary of the changes that were made in each of the contracts. The bottom line is there's really nothing really substantive that's changed in the contracts. It's bringing things up to speed with current personnel, current practices, changes in state statutes, those kinds of things. I did note on my summary here, probably the most significant change is previously the contract was between the school board and the school. DPI has strongly advised that we change that to be between the school district and the governance board of the charter school for the establishment of the school. So that really is the biggest change in the contract, is that it's between the school board and the governance board. I'm happy to go point by point down each of these, but if anybody has questions, but it really is just bringing things in line with state statutes and current practice, which hasn't really changed in many years.
As a former teacher in eAchieve, I like to see that the teacher caseloads will be reviewed annually, that's actually built in. I know it was custom and past practice, but that's actually there. I think there's a good piece in the contract. Another one.
Do you have another one?
I do.
Go ahead.
In the section, eliminated expelled students as those whom we will accept. So do we accept expelled students?
So from our own residents, certainly the school board has the authority to place a student in eAchieve, and we work with them as best as we can. We haven't seen a tremendous amount of success with that yet, but we continue to work with them. From outside of the district, however, we've been advised by DPI that in order to have that happen, this school board would need to reopen the entire expulsion hearing for a student that was never our student and essentially overturn the decision of the other school district. So we stopped that practice a few years ago of allowing expelled students from other districts into eAchieve.
Mr. Gray, I mean, we've always, I thought we were always under the impression that an expelled student, no district had to take an expelled student, but they could take an expelled student. I'm kind of...
They don't have to, and I
Bring your mic up.
don't necessarily believe they're supposed to, but I do know that generally, when we expel a student, they aren't able to go to another regular public school. Unless the statutes have changed on that recently.
So the statute's been clarified, I'm on. The statute's been clarified recently for school districts, and that only a school board can overturn another school board. And since an expulsion is the act of a school board, regardless of what we have in policy saying we could accept somebody or not, on each individual case, we would have to bring those cases to you to review the expulsion from another school district, and then as a Board of Education, make a determination if you wanted to accept the student or not. So that would be the process that we would have to follow. And through policy, under expelled students, we've eliminated that as an option for our district. We don't have any background with the students who are entering, so that was the recommendation through the policy committee to the board.
I knew that, so I wanted to bring it out.
I guess the question I have is, how do you know if a student's been expelled?
They have to submit their records, and we review their records. So for every e-achieve or open enrolled student to our district, upon request of records from the other district, we get those expulsion orders. Rick and I review those orders. We still review them even with the policy change to see if there would be a case that we wanted to bring forward to you. But generally, the kids who are expelled from other districts are expelled for a good reason.
I thought the purpose of a charter school was to allow you to have some leeway relative to statutes and policy.
This is a statute that, I'm trying to think of how many years ago it was now. I think it was about 2 years ago, a year ago, when Diane was first on the policy committee, this came forward. So going on a year and a half ago, the clarification came in because it always came down to the school board. And so that was in the statute forever. We have not had that as part of charter agreements. We haven't had that as part of policy. We haven't even researched if it's an option at the state through a charter agreement or not. But I do believe that because it's the authority of one school board, the governing body of that district, the governing body of our district would still have to weigh in on it, regardless of what we would have in policy. We did ask that question at the time of Neola.
Yeah, but again, we're talking about a charter school. I mean, charter schools, if you look at the STEM contract, they have a whole list of policies that they want waivers from. Same thing with when it was called Harvey Phillips. That was created and it was given exemptions to, administrate state statutes or state parameters. So I'm surprised that when we're creating a charter school, that we can't, not that necessarily want to do this, but that we couldn't at the same time put it as part of that charter an exemption to that.
Administratively, in the past, I believe it was in the past 5 years or so, Rick, when we've reviewed those, prior to the policy change, there were no students that came to us as part of our past practice that we wanted to consider as students, even before we had this updated guidance. And so based off of what our past practice was of not entertaining an expelled student from another district, very similar to the conversation that we had a little over a year ago when we proposed an at-risk program at eAchieve, online at-risk program. And we had comments from the committee that said, we don't want to entertain this type of issue from another school district. That's the same thing that we've held with expelled students. We believe that eAchieve is an option for some of our students who go through our expulsion. They're Waukesha students that we want to continue on in their education. But for students who are outside of the district, we did not believe that that was the best course of action for us as a system, and that's why we haven't entertained it.
Well, maybe there's a better path, so. I just know that there's children that have been expelled in other school districts that wouldn't have necessarily been expelled in our school district, and you kind of say, okay, should we accommodate these children or not? But I guess if we were more marketing to that opportunity set within school districts, we could say there's not that many expulsions that happen anyway across the state. I mean, there are a handful, right, nowadays.
Rick and I deal with about 30 or 40 applications a year of expelled students. Some school districts expel kids for, say, a drug offense through the 21st year without any opportunity for service. Some schools work with those kids through other opportunities and expel kind of as an absolute last chance. So when we review records, We see what we would consider to be a wide array of student that comes to us. Again, knowing what we put into an expulsion, records review, contacts with families, the work that our schools have done with the kids, we know what we're making a recommendation to this board on. We don't know what exists within that student from another school system, and it's very difficult to tell if this one-time drug offense was kind of a deal breaker for the rest of their education. We don't know what other underlying things are there outside of perhaps what was listed in an infant campus behavior report plus the order of the board. We don't know all the things that were suspected of the student and they finally got caught with something. We don't have that relationship with them. That's why the recommendations are what they are.
Okay.
I would add that of all the expulsions before the policy, before the change in practice, we almost always denied because of the expulsion, because the expulsions were for very, very serious things, school threats, significant acts of violence.
Online bullying, pretty substantial.
Right, drug dealing. So it was very, very few and far between that we would look at it and say, there's probably, our school board might do things differently in this case, but almost always it was very clear cut that this is not the kind of student we would want to bring in, even to a virtual school.
I think the other issue too is we'd have to look at how DPI would handle the financial end of it. If we brought a student in that was expelled from another district and applied for state aid, which comes directly from that other district, they could argue, they could potentially make a valid argument that this person was expelled. We don't have to pay funding for bringing the student in. Not saying that would happen, but I think it's something we should probably look at if we are going to look at a policy waiver to allow certain kids in.
Sounds to me like an opportunity, not a problem. I mean, the reality is we can approve this. It's an opportunity for us to deal with it in a different way if we so choose.
Well, I'm thinking if that is something we could review, I mean, you could approve this and we could add an addendum on at any time if you think it's something we should explore. 'Cause I agree, it might be an opportunity depending on the logistics of it, but we would just have to make sure that the financial pieces are.
Well, even as revised here, it wouldn't exclude us. It just doesn't specifically mention them as a group that we're going to focus on or allow in. So basically, the contract would be silent on that matter, and that gives us all the liberty to make a change if we want, in practice moving forward if we wanted to.
Well, the way I'm looking at it is an opportunity, let's say if we let other districts know across the state that rather than expelling a child, since they're all afraid of expelling children because it affects their numbers, we're willing to take children upon our approval and recommendation that you haven't expelled and enroll them into our school like we do with Montessori.
Sure.
They would still get the funding, but they would pay us for using eAchieve.
Right. Instead of an open enrolled situation, it's just a contract between districts.
Right.
And then we don't have the expulsion issue.
And then that's a business opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
It's good for kids and hopefully good for other districts. Anyway.
I wonder if any other virtual schools do it, and if they don't, why don't they?
The list, well, the list keeps changing because more virtual schools keep coming online.
Right.
They kind of automatically get added to it, but then more are taken off that list of who will accept expelled students.
Right.
The DPI does maintain a list.
They do.
That very list, yeah.
What I've noticed in the review of the expulsion orders, I've seen a lot of school districts place a student similar to what we do into eAchieve. They're doing that within their own virtual schools.
Right. Yeah.
The kid is still applying to go to eAchieve for one reason or another. but there's a written component to that order that says they'll go to such and such virtual academy, which is tied to the local schools.
Right, yeah.
I guess nobody's thought of doing it the Montessori way, where we have like we've done with Montessori, where we partner with Montessori, we take the child in, and we subcontract to Montessori. So it would be kind of unique if we did the same thing with eAchieve, where we marketed to the school districts across the state, rather than pushing that child out of your system for whatever reason. You can enroll them in eAchieve, they become your student, but you subcontract that child's educational services to us through eAchieve, rather than expelling them. So maybe.
The one advantage to that is they remain a student in that other district, so if they don't continue, we don't get hit with
Right.
a quitter or a dropout. So that might be something.
Sounds like a business opportunity.
Yeah.
Mr. Como?
Just wondering, are we looking at one motion or are we looking at two separate motions because we have two different contracts?
Doesn't matter to me how you do it.
I'm
Point of
asking our
order.
chairman.
Well, we have two different contracts. We could do it in two separate motions. Should-
Okay. So I'm going to move approval of the charter school contract between eAchieve Academy Governance Board, Inc., and the School District of Waukesha as presented.
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. Now we're off to the elementary contract. Any delta between those, between the two contracts, or the same applies?
It's the only place that there's a difference between the contracts is where it starts to talk about instruction, the role of parents in the elementary, and that, other than that, the bulk of the contract is satisfying state statutes, which is the same for both, the relationship between the school board and the governance board, and that's the same between the two.
Okay. Do I have a motion? Ms. Ryanchek's motions for?
I second it.
And Ms. Voigt seconds. Additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Ask for opposed because I didn't hear any. If someone wanted to oppose, please clarify my count.
And Michelle's here, so if we can,
You want to move her in?
to discussion under consideration of resolution for the issuance of the bonds, so.
Okay, and that's a discussion item.
Yeah, we'll kind of go through the.
Need yours back. I saw notes on it.
So the logistics of everything is, if you look in the documents in your packet, there are a lot of blank spaces. The sale of the bonds is actually Wednesday, so when you come to Wednesday night's board meeting, you'll have completed, filled out documents. But I wanted to agendize it to give you an idea what you'll be looking at, and then have Michelle come here and update us on where we think we are in terms of the borrow and how's it going and what's the outlook, so.
Great, thank you. I believe the first item in your handout is the timeline. So as Darren mentioned, we are really in the pre-pricing phase for the note issue, and this first phase of the total of $60 million that was approved at referendum, this first phase is for $45 million. We'll talk a little bit about the second phase in just a moment, but the final interest rates will be locked in on Wednesday for the full board's approval. What we're looking at now, I believe the next item in your handout maybe is this interest rate chart?
Yep.
So you can just get a perspective of where interest rates have gone since the referendum was approved. Nothing but good news there. So we're looking at the 10-year MMD index. So it's really the best proxy for a 10-year issue, which is what you're bringing to market. This is for AAA rated municipal market issues. The district's credit rating has been affirmed by Standard & Poor's. as not a AAA. You are affirmed as a AA, which is 2 notches below AAA. A few words on the credit rating. I think that's a fantastic rating. And when we had the conversation with the rating analyst, some of the feedback that came back is you're doing all the right things. You know, your fund balance is solid, your financial management is solid. You have weathered fluctuations in enrollment. It's kind of interesting for more of a quote-unquote metropolitan school district to be growing. You're positive in open enrollment as well, which is not necessarily typical. It's usually more of the smaller suburban districts that benefit from open enrollment, but in Waukesha, given kind of the diverse nature of what you're able to offer, you're able to not only keep your own students, but attract others. So there's many, many positives. The only thing really preventing you from being any higher in a credit rating would be even more reserves or fund balance, which I think, your current level of about 25% is more than sufficient and adequate for your ongoing operations. So,
And isn't that jump in fund balance, it's quite
Significant.
substantial
Yes.
above where we are? It's not a matter of $500,000 or...
Right. It's not a minuscule amount of fund balance you'd have to add. It's somewhat dramatic. And for a large district with a large budget is really difficult to achieve, I think. And I think you'd get pushback from the taxpayers, quite honestly, if you were to accumulate fund balance in excess just for a rating conversation. So a great credit rating, as we look at this index, what we see here is probably a little bit lower than where you would actually be, just because, again, it's a AAA index. But we can see that rates have really substantially gone down, 80, 90 basis points really since the referendum was passed, and even about 20 basis points since we were going to lock in rates just a couple of months ago, put the brakes on it and said, we'd rather achieve the spend down requirements that the IRS requires of us and be able to keep all of your investment income than lock in rates, and that proved to be the right decision as well. So that's just a background on interest rates in general.
Mr. Como?
Just more for you, Michelle. You just witnessed we passed 2 charter school contracts for eAchieve, and the reason why we have a positive open enrollment number is because of that approach that we took many years ago, and that's really helped us out quite a bit. So glad we approved those.
Right.
Like
I said, I think the spectrum that you're able to provide as a large district is really beneficial because you're attracting students because of that. Any questions so far? Otherwise, we'll get into the financing plan. The financing plan is no different than what you saw a few months ago, preceding your consensus to move forward with these 2 phases. The phases have been designed to take advantage of low interest rates with general obligation promissory notes that will be locked in this coming Wednesday in the amount of $45 million. And then the second phase of $15 million coming very early, more than likely in 2020, in the form of a bank loan. And the reason we're doing it in 2 phases is, one, we want to hit the spend down requirements that the IRS asks of us so that you can keep all those investment earnings. And 2, we like having a piece of the financing plan that's prepayable at any time. So these notes you're about to issue, the last 3 years are prepayable. Those are shaded in gray. Well, I'm not sure what they're shaded in on what you're looking at on the blue copies, but those are the 3 maturities that are prepayable of the note issue. So not nearly as much flexibility as we look at the bank loan, which is the next phase of the financing, which will be prepayable in its entirety at any time. So that's going to really give you flexibility in future years to prepay debt and really look at your overall mill rate and manage that over time.
The other thing that callable feature, if you look at the interest expense over those last 3 years, you're not going to come back and refinance and save a whole lot of interest just because the term's so short at that point. So I don't know if that is something we would, any scenario is possible, I guess, but the likelihood of that being worth your time at that point, I would question.
Right. I would agree.
Mr. Como?
Before we went to referendum, we were making projections on the interest rate. Could you remind me of what we projected then and where we're coming in at?
Yes, we did. Pre-referendum, we had this as two phases, 45 million and 15 million, at 3.25% and 3.5%. So we're looking at 2.3%. Again, that's an estimate on the notes, and then 2.71% on the bank loan. So significantly lower. In total interest cost, it's a little under 3 million less. But again, we'll know that with certainty on Wednesday what that exact number is.
If you open your packet, the next costing is the original referendum,
Okay.
so you can see them side by side.
Okay.
Yeah, and as you look at them side by side, you'll see that the mill rate impact is the same. So we don't expect to come in under the mill rate estimate, at least initially, but the average mill rate over time would certainly be lower. So if you compare that mill rate column, which is the second from the right, pre-referendum, ranged from 81 cents and then decreased down to 74 cents. You can see now we're looking at 81 cents decreasing to about 70 cents. So it's certainly going to be lower over time. The initial impact will be the same. We see no reason to not have it that way. It allows you to pay off principal faster. So having a softer landing on the mill rate at the expense of not amortizing more principal doesn't seem like necessarily the right trade-off.
I think that was direction that you received from us too, to have that flexibility. So.
Yes.
So, right now, we're talking about phase one, which is the $45 million borrow. Phase two shows is that borrow's going to target borrow is on January 28th, 2020.
Correct. So by putting it in the next calendar year, we're able to separate it for IRS purposes. So that 15 million falls under what's called the small issuer exception. That's not going to be subject to any spend down requirements. So it helps us to have that in the next calendar year.
Okay.
This is good news.
The only risk is by waiting 6 or 7, well, let's say 8 months, almost 8 months. If interest rates should jump up between now and then that would add cost, right?
Correct.
And we would, if there's a real shift occurring, we could do that loan at any time.
Right. There's nothing preventing
Yeah,
us
that
from
option.
moving faster on that. We wouldn't qualify as a small issuer because it'd be in the same
Right.
calendar year, but,
You give up that flexibility, but
right.
I guess I'm just wondering how much is that flexibility worth, because interest rates are so low, and is it worth us not considering an earlier issuance? Something that we don't need to decide tonight, but maybe over the next 60 days?
Absolutely.
You and Mr. Clark go through that and
yeah, I think
that through?
I mean, not knowing where let's pretend we did know where interest rates were going. But seeing them where they are, I do think this is an ongoing conversation and not something we shelve until December to talk about a January. I mean, if rates stay this low, I think the argument, and we reevaluate the spend down and see where we really are, then we might need to move.
Might just go ahead and pull
And-
the trigger, but, we got time to think that through. 60
Yeah.
days, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we find ourselves in a situation, finally, where I think you'll earn more on this first piece in interest income than what you're paying in interest expense. So you're generating arbitrage, which is good if you hit your spend down targets. Then you get to keep all of those earnings. So we're trying to achieve that. So we're trying to do this balancing act between achieving that and not giving you too much interest rate exposure for the second phase.
Yeah, that was really the goal, the 45, I mean, besides the spend down, but is to lock in and significantly reduce that interest rate risk. We're locking in 3/4 of the amount at a fantastic rate, we think. We'll know Wednesday. But that 15 million, certainly within 60 days, we could move on that, if not
Absolutely.
within 30, maybe.
Right, that's a bank placement, it's not rated, we don't have to go through all of the things we just went through to get this issue to market, so can move very fast on that.
Well, it's something to consider. Okay. This discussion, not action item, but any additional questions or any more information provided?
Yeah, the back several pages are just the resolution that you'll be asked to consider on Wednesday. But they'll have a lot more numbers and tables filled out. I purposely left the blank pages in there, just so you know, there's a lot to that document. But it all works out well with the board meeting, so we should be set for Wednesday night.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Back to our action items. Approval of 2019-2020 student fees. Mr. Clark?
Yeah, every year at this time, we approve next year's student fees to tie in with the high school sending out the course offerings and all that information. Now, it's not as important that this timing occur now because we've eliminated most of the course fees except for, I believe we're down to lifeguarding. So I provided you the history of when we last changed a lot of these fees. Most of them have not been altered. We are not recommending a change in food service this year. So we can answer any questions you'd like. Again, there's really no changes except for a few more AP or course fees being eliminated, which was a goal that we had targeted a few years ago.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, just as we've been trending down our fees when we can, just wondering how much have we essentially saved our parents over the last couple of years and as we've gone in this direction, roughly?
Roughly.
I won't hold you to
I
the
believe
number.
at the middle school level, we calculated the average student taking the average course load was $40, and I believe the high school, and we didn't get into athletic and parking and all that, but just course fees, I believe the amount was close to double that, maybe even $80, $85, somewhere in that range per student.
Okay. Yeah, I like the trend. I like the discussions we've had over the past couple of years. Did we do a comparison to other districts?
There was a survey, and we're kind of in the middle on the averages. I forgot to run it off, to be honest, with other districts. But when you factor in that we don't charge all the course fees that other districts, we are well below what other. But in terms of registration and parking and all those, we're kind of in the middle of the pack.
So when you do a comparison to service or
Yes.
whatever you want to
Yeah.
say.
We're certainly
In
not
the
an
middle.
outlier in any of them.
Okay.
Ms. Voigt?
I may ask a question and get a clarification. For clarification first, when you talk about the high school AP course fees, is that the exam fee or the course?
It's the course fee. The AP exam fee is still out there for
It's still out there.
parents
That's-
too.
that's the
When they-
clarification.
Parents sign up with AP, and they handle it like they're ordering from something from Amazon. It's between them and whatever the third party is that handles that. Total registration.
And then my second question is, I'm not familiar with Pay to Ride, the Pay to Ride program, how that works.
For students who are a walker by board policy, they live within 2 miles of their school. There is a pay to ride the bus option for families out there. I can't tell you the participation level of that. I don't think it's overly big. But we do offer that option for families.
Just for within 2 miles.
Or, yeah, that's the vast majority of the people who would be eligible for that would be within, their deemed a walker.
And then they would just jump on the regular bus that's going by?
It's coordinated with the bus company.
Okay.
So, then the
If there
conversation.
is space and if it is along the bus route, yes.
Yes.
Okay, do I have Mr. Como?
One other question. With respect to the lunch and breakfast programs, we used to have that fairly regulated. Is that still fairly regulated? And we had to adjust our prices?
Yep, they're, every year in the past, we've had to look at the comparison of where we're at versus where the federal government says we should be at. And then in the past, you were charged with raising it a dime unless you went to get an exemption. They've changed the rules slightly in that if you have a positive fund balance on January 1st of the year that you're putting in the new fees, you do not have to follow that any longer.
Nice, that's,
So as
I
long
would
as
call
we
that a
keep our-
commonsensical rule.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, and that's the Fund 50 fund balance.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it.
That's a
They
nice
would-
change.
They would give us a hard time for having too big of a fund balance and then turn around and say you have to raise your prices.
Because I
So
thought we were targeted to be raised again.
we were, but we don't
and-
have to.
Yeah. Yeah, my memory works sometimes.
It makes total sense to do it this way
Yeah.
because if
No, I
you're
like the
carrying a
change.
good fund
Yeah.
balance, you shouldn't be raising your prices to your parents.
Yeah, it's a good change.
Do I have a motion for the fees?
I move approval of the 2019-2020 student fees as presented.
Okay, a motion by Mr. McCaffrey, second by Mr. Reinacek. Additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Action item F.
STEM? Gonna come up and,
Yes, you're the approval of the Waukesha Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Charter School contract. Tonight's the big night. Like Battle for Westeros or something like that. Game of Thrones.
now or no?
Yeah, might as well. In your packet, you had a copy of the STEM contract where they made some modifications based on our discussions. I looked at it in one area that they did make modifications, but one area I wanted to add was ability for the school district at their discretion. It was just. Okay. Just added that bolded at the bottom and. It's not, I requested it be added, yes. If anyone's uncomfortable with it, we certainly can debate it. The idea is to make it as vanilla as possible. We're not saying anything specifically because if we do anything on enrollment, it would probably have to go through DPI for a waiver. So, and it doesn't mean that we do anything at all. If we're satisfied with how things are going at STEM as a district, there's no need for the school district of Waukesha to look at additional strategies to address enrollment. But if you don't open up the door within the contract, within the charter, the door is closed. I want the doors for the district to be closed if they so choose to address the issue. Where it goes is on page 6, into 7 is where that particular
Yeah.
section is at, if you guys are looking for in your specific packet, the area that it's inserted into. Article 10, means of achievable racial and ethnic balance. In this case, it's demographics is what it's addressing in that particular sentence. Mr. Como.
Now, I know that there's been some discussion since this last F&F committee meeting, and there's been some work done with Bill and Jim and Melissa, and I don't know if there were other people involved. Could you go through some of the changes that you had discussed over this last month and which came to agreement with, and kind of take us through some of those changes?
Sure.
Definitely.
So we just put together, we just kind of adapted and added some changes we heard, and we appreciate the feedback that we had from last month's meeting. And so we looked at some of those things. And so the big things that we did in the version of the draft was the policy updates and looking at enrollment, and then, of course, the diversity, racial and ethnic balance. And so last month we talked about just the policy and the wording updates. I don't think that there were any questions about that or any discussion really. I think the enrollment piece and looking at that and making sure that we were looking at our enrollment of our overall total in each building, that was a change in the contract. And again, I don't think that there was a lot of discussion on that. I think that everybody was in agreement in that, making that change and allowing us to be able to have our enrollment be at building capacity, so we could make sure that we didn't have to refuse students and be able to take students off the wait list. I think one of the biggest things was the sibling priority, which we looked at. And we did have conversation about that at a district level and as a governing board, and we decided that to keep it at what status quo is right now, and that's at kindergarten.
And that's a DPI mandate, actually, so.
Yeah, so looking at that and keeping, instead of, we were talked about last month at the meeting, opening that up to all the grade levels, but we backed that off and changed the charter language, and you can see that in the red line version, that it's just for kindergarten. And that would be for any currently enrolled and attending, and that's been our practice since STEM opened. So we made that adjustment, but the wording is as is in the contract. So we did make that adjustment. Also, actually it's not there, let me go back. Something else that we talked about last month was also teacher priority and having a teacher priority enrollment, and we did eliminate that from the contract as well. So any teachers that currently have students at STEM, those would be grandfathered in, they would stay, we wouldn't change any of those. And we did look at the two of us, and I think that we entered that in a memo that I believe was sent to the committee, talking about how many families how many students we actually had, and it didn't break down to very many. I think that there's like a handful of students, of teachers that are at between our two buildings.
Yeah.
So we did eliminate that wordage in the contract as well, so that is not in there. So again, I'm taking the input that you gave us last month, and we did make those changes.
Some of the strategies that we had then, just for the board, based on feedback that we received from conversations, we've probably put 30, 40, 50 hours into conversations since the last board meeting, so we've definitely taken heed of everything that was mentioned, advised, suggested, recommended. Just some of the things up there as addendums were, continuing and increasing community outreach, increased partnerships. I don't know that we wanted to pigeonhole that one necessarily, so we did leave it, Kurt, similar to what you say, somewhat vanilla, so that it's open, so that we could have, that could be anywhere from businesses to community centers to, you name it, we could hit those locations and be present there. That could also be district events, things like that, where we're reaching out to businesses to partner up with us. A regional busing conversation has come up. I know that was just a question that the board had presented. Continued participation in community and district events, so we're definitely not going to cease doing those. Those continue to increase with the help of district PR, Terry Schuster, and all the amazing folks here at the Lindholm Building. We're going to continue to do all those. Our teachers are there, our families are there, our students are present as well. And then increasing advertisement and exposure to Waukesha families through the mail, obviously through digital, through our website, but trying to get to folks that don't have Wi-Fi or email or tech access in their homes. And then more open house events, family events for both current and potential STEM families, just to open up our campuses so folks can see that. I think that's huge, and food is a way to people's hearts sometimes, and it does get them into buildings. A lot of these we're doing, and I think a lot of these we can increase our efforts to continue to bring folks into our buildings. So those were some of the things, again, that we've seen, things that we heard last time we were here, and things that we're going to continue to pursue.
I appreciate you guys taking the feedback from last month, bringing it forth to the appropriate people to work through it and to come back, because I do think that you listened quite well and you addressed what this committee was concerned about pretty well. So, you open for motions?
Well,
I'll make a motion. I move to approve the STEM Academy Charter School agreement as presented.
And I second the motion.
okay. Well, as presented,
No, with your amendment.
with that amendment.
I'm good with the
As
amendment.
amended?
Yep. That was my intention.
That makes it a lot easier. But I just want to say the amendment is only going to come into play if the other stuff you're trying to do the district decides, not the board, the district decides that they want to try something else in the event. You know, it's not like we're going to say, you have to do this, you have to do this. It's what the district decides in conjunction with STEM, so.
Correct.
Try to keep it as open and vanilla as possible and give you guys a chance to see what you can do to address the situation as you've proposed, okay?
No, and we appreciate that, we do. I mean, I feel like both our sites are doing well and great enrollment, great opportunities, but there's always, we're never sitting on our coattails and resting, so I think it's great to get feedback, so thank you very much.
Mr. Baumgart?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things, because we did meet for some time to talk about some of the stuff, and they came up with lots more issues, or not issues, avenues that they've been pursuing that I was aware of, which is very positive. Nobody mentioned the governance board yet tonight, and I think it should be mentioned. They are interested in making this work. They've been active in it. They've responded to it and putting the contract together in other meetings. So that's important to know that. Ultimately, it comes down to the parents. The parents have to make the final decision as to whether this child is going to be in our program or not, and that's something we have to remember. And I guess that's all.
I just want
Do
to
we
add,
have a
I've been in
second?
contact with DPI. They
think
made
we
a
had
couple recommendations
Diane-
on
yeah,
things
Diane
we can do. Also, I've had a number of discussions with our bilingual Hispanic liaisons and so on to find out what are things that we can do to make this work. And a lot of those are things that really, as you noted, Mr. O'Brien, very hard to put into a contract, but are things that we can do, building relationships, doing some of those things where we reach out to these folks. And I kind of heard pretty much the same thing from all our people here on what it would take to get, more of our minority population interested in STEM. Of course, they think it's because everyone likes the dual language program, but I guess they would be biased in that way. But I think there are some things that we could move on pretty quickly that I think you'll start seeing some.
Trying not to be too specific on anything. I'm just saying in general, I like the proposals that have been talked about tonight. I just think that we just can't ignore that we have some progress to make if possible. And we can't just leave it up to 100% of, we're going to do all these things and it's going to suddenly change things, because we don't know for sure. I mean, we just can't.
Correct.
Any additional discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Thanks for all the effort. Well, I would have had to amend it, and that's a lot of work, man. Let me get back to my agenda. There we are. So we're done with the action items.
Got a lot done so far.
Information item, monthly budget report.
Hey, as we get closer to the year end and are scrutinizing even harder on our budget to make sure we're in line with everything is looking good. We don't have any areas of concern at the moment. For our local revenues, taxes are always our big thing this time of year, and we're right in line with what we've been getting compared to last year. Our rentals look really high this month, but that's because the Richardson School rent, we got the April and May, and they ended up in the same month. So it isn't that we rented out the buildings any higher. It's just timing of payments. We also received the annual rent this month for the property on TT, the farmland property. So, but overall, our local revenues are right in line, almost identical to last year, 79.69% compared to 79.7%. So right where we expect them to be. Interdistrict sources, we continue to receive e-achieve payments every month for the tuition, the students that are tuition paid. State sources, we received our common school fund, and it was quite a bit nicer than we had anticipated. So the librarians are very happy and out shopping at the moment to spend, because we do have to spend that in the same fiscal year that we get it. So we also received our educator effectiveness grant money. Federal sources, our grants are starting to come in, and payments are being made, and we had almost $400,000 in grant payments, which is great. Other revenues, I'm just pointing this one out because it shows a $200,000 negative, but that was from a journal entry where we basically moved the EMC payments for Summit View. We are putting them in the same account that the expenses are coming out of in order to show just a wash and be able to tell how much it ended up costing the district of anything above and beyond the insurance. And so the original $200,000 payment was coded to the revenue, so we moved it, and that's why there's a $200,000 negative this month. It's there, it's just on the expense side now. Overall, we're doing really good. We've collected a little over 70%, which aligns with last year. For expenses, salary and benefits, salaries are coming out just a little bit higher, but benefits are coming out lower, and we'll look at that for budgeting next year to find out why that is and try to shore that up. But we expect overall to still be in good shape on the ending between the two of them. Purchase services, we had $439,000 payment to Heartland Business Systems for the paging systems at the high schools, also legal fees and pro healthcare nursing services brought that up to one of our higher spending categories. But again, right in line with last year at where we're spending, so no concerns there. Non-capital objects, big one was the payment for Milwaukee PC, which is for the eAchieve computers. That's where the students go to get their computers and take them back. Let's see. Capital objects, nothing major in April. Debt retirement, there was no general fund debt retirement in April. So in the insurance adjustments, you now see that in a credit in the insurance side, that's from the same $200,000 adjustment I just spoke to. No operating transfers in April. Main source of other objects are really our RevTrak fees and any invitational fees for sporting events this time of year get to add up. Overall, our expenses are at 59.18% compared to 60.72% last year for the general fund, so it's in good shape. Fund 27 is always fairly slow until we get to the end of the year and we have our big transfer, but we did receive a nice flow-through payment this month and Medicaid reimbursement. So for overall in our revenues, we've collected a little bit higher this year than we did last year, and that's just with the timing of the grant payments. Salary and benefits, they're the main source of spending for special education, coming in right where we expect them to be. Purchase services, private school tuition as usual, and transportation are the big things under there. Other than that, overall, we're right where we expect to be for the Fund 27 expenditures. Any questions on expenses? And if not, we can go to the health insurance.
I ask a question?
Sure.
Go ahead, Ms. White.
When you talk back under revenue about the annual rent for the property on TT, what are we renting at TT?
Farmers are harvesting and planting out there.
Okay.
It's not,
Kind of. There's a lot of construction.
yeah, we put a new driveway through the middle of it for them, but it's not, I forget what the dollars are, but it's not,
If you've been by
In here.
So there is still
access.
some crops being grown enough to be able
Yeah,
to generate
It's not a
some revenue.
large amount of money at all. It's
Fire the
just,
trucks at night.
it's like $8,000 or something, but we also, in the committee approved this, I want to say in January, we also put in the lease that we were not in control of the construction schedule, and they had to enter into it knowing that the DOT is building a bypass through the property, so. And they had to make they were on their own to find access and maintain access to the property, so we made it pretty clear.
Sorry, I've been looking. Yeah, go ahead, Ms.
That's okay.
Reinhardt.
Thank you. I just wanted to know what special ed services are we not able to provide that we're paying out? Or is this just when kids that have special needs are choosing to go to private schools?
I believe it's is Joe
a-
still here? There. I would prefer he answer
Joe's here,
this.
but it's a placement to meet the needs of the student, right?
Correct,
Like the
based on their
Richardson
IEP.
School?
Correct. Some
Yeah.
students that exhibit behaviors or have sensory type needs that go beyond our ability to provide for ourselves, so we do tuition out with a number of locations. The Richardson School are probably our largest contract, and they're the group that's renting the Pleasant Hill site.
Thank you. Well, we have less and less each year because we're trying to handle as much as we can.
Actually, due to the needs of kids, our alternative placements have gone up. We've talked about this a little bit at the Teaching and Learning Committee. While our district enrollment has gone down, our special ed numbers continue to climb. So we're at about 2,030, 2,040 students in special ed right now, whereas our district enrollment is down to about 12,700. So we have experienced an increased number of students with disabilities in the last several years in the district.
Thank you.
Mr. Como.
Yeah, and I know, I think we may have next month some amendments, adjustments to our budgetary process. Don't we do that twice a year?
Do, but the way that the board approves the budget based at a pretty high level means
not
that we
need
might not have, because we don't have a lot of changes, and the ones that we do pretty much fit within the categories. So I'll review that.
Okay.
And bring it forward if we have anything.
Yeah, I didn't know if that Object 790 had an impact on that or not.
And you don't adopt it on an object level. It's function, major
It's a
function.
budget, it's
or
a,
fund.
at the fund
Fund.
level,
level,
right?
so-
Fund level.
Yeah, okay.
I just, in fact, I was going to ask the same question because I just remember the auditor one year said that we should do a better job of getting approval of transfers from one item to the next.
Transfer between funds, if we go beyond what, Fund 27 is one we have to do. We know we're going to do that because that's the way the accounting system's set up. But the way we have the board approve the budget now cleaned up a lot of these miscellaneous object ones. But if you get involved with 10 to fund 50 or whatever, we would have to bring that back to you.
Or if we were expecting a much larger spend than we had a board approval, if we're expecting to go over budget, that we would have to bring forward and say,
Right.
we're expecting to be over budget, this is what we need to have the board approve to increase for that particular fund. But the individual at the function level, we don't have to do when it's approved at the fund level.
Let's just keep a sharp eye on that because I remember that was something that we had to change versus what was done in the past per an auditor, is that they wanted us to actually approve some of these things.
That's when we started the process.
Yeah, that's when we started the process, and there was always, because we had situations where out of the blue something would be done that nobody anticipated, and it was just moving money from, a large amount of money from within, let's say, the maintenance fund.
I recall those.
We recall those, and we
I
said,
do recall
well,
those.
we should approve those. It shouldn't just be money that's suddenly spent without an approval.
Yeah.
And that's because the budget used to be approved at that lower level. But we've done it this way for 3 years now, I think, and the auditors have not had issue with it in that time frame.
And I think the reporting out of,
Those procedures changed.
Correct.
there's been improvements all around.
Yes, I would agree.
I would say right now, our main transfers, when I'm thinking through what budget things we've done, are mainly grants, because they'll start out with what we think we're going to get, and then we end up getting a different amount, and then we budget a smaller amount, hoping that there'll be grant carryover, and then if they spend more, but it's always a change on both the revenue and the expense side to wash each other out. It isn't just adding more funds to.
I have a question. Just a quick, Joe, with the special education services, what other sites are we using? Are we using like GLS or
We have one student, I believe, maybe two at GLS, just due to a variety of needs. We have some students at Learning Center West, which is a CISA program. We utilize Turning Point through CISA.
Okay.
Lad Lake out in Delphi.
Do we have kids or students at Lad Lake?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And we use a variety of other types of placements to address the needs of kids.
I don't have anybody at the Norris Center, though.
Norris changed their program model a couple of years ago to a more project-based learning model.
Okay.
So the kids that we've needed alternative placements for haven't been a good fit there.
Okay. And do we utilize these placements for summer school as well?
For some students who need extended school year, I wouldn't call it summer school. It's an IEP-driven extended school year. It's a service that comes through IDEA. We have utilized, for instance, the Richardson campus or the Richardson School at Pleasant Hill for that, yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on monthly budget?
I just wanted to direct you to the health claims payable through April. We are still standing in pretty good condition. The ending balance right now is 2.2 million. There are still a few minor expenditures that need to come out of that, but it's, as of the end of April, it would be over 2 million. Now, I'm starting to see the claims come in a little bit higher, so.
We've talked about it.
That's right, exactly. I'm not expecting any major, massive drop, but I would expect it to come down more in line with the 1.7 or, somewhere where we have been in years past and not be over 2 million when we finish, but. Yes, Joe?
Well, I was keeping my fingers
Yes,
crossed.
please do.
Sorry.
Any questions on the health
We
claims?
don't have much
payable?
control over that.
We don't, unfortunately. No, we don't.
Turn to luck on that one.
Okay, anything else?
That's all I have, unless you have
Okay,
questions.
wonderful. Referendum update.
Yeah, just a quick report on where we are in terms of this summer's project. We are, once the bid documents went out for the 2019 work, we've transitioned to the planning for the middle school and work at South. And Hillcrest would be another school that we're looking at. But the initial bid results came in, and so we've adjusted our budget up slightly to $4.6 million. That does include about $200,000 in contingency. We think we've planned pretty well, but anytime you enter into older buildings, some of which the original drawings aren't always what was built, you certainly have to factor that in. I also mainly wanted to share the budget format that we're using to track, and this will probably be the update I'll provide you periodically. The shaded column is the 11 schools that we're doing work on in 2019. So you can see the breakout of how we get to the 4.6 million. At the bottom of the page, you can see the funding sources for the $4.6 million, and we talked about that during the referendum information campaign about how we had all these different safety grant and district operational dollars and Fund $50 for the work at Bethesda, because we have to go into the kitchen area. And then these are very early, but the next two columns are 2020-21 work. We have estimates in there for Hawthorne and Hillcrest for their secure entrances, and then the estimated work for the middle schools and what's at South. And again, these numbers will change. So these are preliminary numbers. We're still going through the vetting process, and we go through a value engineering process where you sit down with the selected vendors and say, okay, anything stick out to you as being not perfect, or is there a better design, or is it? So this is really a gross number of where we are right now. And then at the bottom of the executive summary under the narrative, one of the things that you're concerned about in this market where it's hard to get a lot of bids is marketing the plan as well as possible. So we sent out, and when I say we, most of this was Findorf, our construction company, sent out directly to 164 potential bidders. 17 bid invites were sent directly to Waukesha-based subcontractors or suppliers. I thought the board would be interested in knowing that. I personally reached out to the Business Alliance and the Chamber to make them aware that the bid documents were out there for the public to access via our website, and I gave them directions to get there. The projects were advertised in 9 different builder exchanges in print with the Freeman and Journal Sentinel and Daily Journal. We're on Findorf and our website. So we received 57 total bids, and again, there's different packages for HVAC and plumbing and da-da-da-da. And 9 of those bids were from Waukesha-based businesses. So just some facts. And then one other thing we're gathering and we'll have, and we'll include it in the newsletter and on our website, is I've asked Findorf to track how many district residents are working on site via all the subs and everything, so we can get a rough, not that they're there every day of every project, but if their trade is there, to get a head count of how many taxpayers are actually working on these projects.
Come on.
Like, as we go through the bidding process, do we have a rubric, or we have the process that we've used in the past where we give weights to certain things that are important to us? Are we doing that for this, or
It's
or not?
a lot of it is more informally, but I think we are. Findorf works with a lot of vendors, so you have that initial one where you go, yeah, I've worked with that company, maybe not. You go through, kind of analyze where you have a large number, and when I say large number, you might have 5 people respond to a bid package or a trade. If one of them is a real outlier with their bid up or down, especially the down, you kind of, so we sit down and we go through and validate their response and pick the best value to the district. So it's an informal, but I do think there's a rubric and a process there where we go through and select and try to get the best match possible.
Thank you. Just a shout out to Findorf. They recognize that we have roughly 60 students interested in the trades, my son being one of them. And he went and shadowed a plumber this past weekend and watched him build a house and helped throughout the day. And then we got an invitation from Findorf asking if he'd like to come help work this summer, grab a hammer and a drill and just really get a taste of all the different trades people working in the district and actually get to help. So, yeah, they're even asking our students to come and be a part of it, so.
One other thing, and quite honest, Joe and I were just talking today, and Tim's involved with a lot of these. We've had so many meetings, there's a lot of things going on, and I asked them, our planning team, to keep us up to date. One other thing we're doing that kind of got lost in the wind is asking Bray and Findorf to go into our engineering classrooms and talk about design, and so that is occurring or will occur. We didn't do it with the secure entrances just because we were on such a tight time frame. But next year, with the secondary level schoolwork going, there'll be some outreach from Findorf and Bray to give us some exposure to our students. That's where we stand. So I also included, I believe it was in the update, some communications directly to the schools that went to every staff or asked the principals to forward on, because I think staff like hearing from their principal more than an email from Lindholm more often than not. Maybe Todd doesn't agree with that, but with the key dates and the construction maps and where parking will be impacted, to give every school, we're working with summer school to make this set of projects go as smooth as we possibly can. So, and to give them notice that even if you're not in the construction zone, you might have a day where we don't have power, you might not have water, you might not have, so to contact their principal to get the okay to come back.
So, quick question. Saw an article on the Bell at Blair.
And for May 16th?
Yeah.
I didn't see that. I did not see that. So,
Wonder if that is important to decide what to do about the Bell. Should it remain where it's at? Should it be preserved? Should it be?
Is there a historical thing with it?
I guess it's important. It's important to the Blair people, and I think the district should.
They're not getting rid of it, but I mean.
we could certainly.
How we use it is.
We can certainly incorporate that into, I know what, I thought when you mentioned Bell, I thought you thought of Bethesda, because they have a Bell there that we are designing around or incorporating into the final solution. So I wasn't aware of a Blair Bell, but.
Yeah, there's a Blair Bell, and
A lot of the old ones had bells.
Yeah.
Well hidden. functioning, but.
Well, it may be something that you can fundraise for, or something that people would want to relocate that bell, because how old was Blair? How long was it running? It must have been one of our older remaining schools, right? And so maybe it's worth preserving or making sure it gets preserved as part of the site. Depends on what the city wants. And what
Yeah,
we
let
want to
me
use.
bring that up at our next team meeting. We meet a week from today. We'll come up with something.
Kids bring the bell with them to Hillcrest.
I know at Hillcrest they ring a bell. Bethesda has a bell. I don't know if it's part of a graduation type of ceremony there, but I know at Hillcrest they do. Every kid who's moving on to the middle school gets to ring the bell.
I don't know if Hawthorne has one or not. So
Yeah, I don't know, but I wasn't aware of that, but we can.
maybe we don't want to relocate it, but maybe, I mean, I was just thinking about whether that, once I saw it, it seemed to be important to the Blair community.
Let me get back to you on that one.
Surprise Tim.
No, I went there, didn't know.
You never rang the bell?
I think we got a bell sitting in storage.
Summer's coming soon, Tim.
Might be a reason why I didn't.
Pretty sure. Maybe we want to do a 2-bell system.
We have a bell sitting in storage somewhere? I think we do, because I think I saw it on one of our websites. No, I can't remember where it is, but I think we do have a bell from a school sitting somewhere. I'm almost positive I saw it on a website, one of our websites. Can't remember what school it's from. Where's the Hillcrest bell? Do we know? From the original Hillcrest.
It's mounted and it's in the hallway.
Oh, is it? From the original Hillcrest up on Main?
It stands about this.
It's huge.
It's wheeled. They can move it. But it's operable. I mean,
Yeah.
Anyway,
we'll do a bell report for the committee.
Yeah, I'd like to know where all the
I'm
bells
concerned about the bell.
Oh, I'm glad you brought it up because something like that is worth
Yeah.
maintaining.
Very good point.
Okay, discussion items. South pool floor.
Yeah, Chad and Tim Williamson and I have been talking about the South Pool, and Chad's our area guy, or what's your title, Chad?
Facilities manager.
Sorry, facility chatter, and he has South as his high school. We have 3 facility managers, and they have a pod, and each of them get a high school, and Chad drew the South Pool topic. So I asked him to come in today, and I believe Tim put some information at your desk.
We have a kind of a layout of the pool and some other information on it.
We're trying to recreate, and I've had some side conversations with Kurt and Joe because they were here when the pool was installed. But part of the operation of the South Pool since we've had it has been a temporary floor that is put in, taken out, depending on FIED and whatever else. And that piece of equipment or apparatus is to the point where we either need to decide, are we creating that? We're not recommending that we try to fix it. It's to the point of either needing to be fully replaced or gotten rid of altogether. So, Tim, if you want to kind of maybe highlight anything I maybe missed, or
I started looking into how the whole floor came about in the first place. I guess in the original design, there was supposed to be a hydraulic floor and all that fun stuff, so.
and thank you for not doing the hydraulic floor. I think that would have been
The pool was approved with a 5-foot depth in the shallow end, and then they went back for a variance to put the portable floor in to raise it to 3'6". I don't know where the 3'6" depth came from. When I called and talked to Tony, I can't remember his full title. He's the pool plan reviewer for the Department of Safety and Professional Services. The only reason he could see that floor would have ever been put in is if you opened it to the general public to swim in. It's not required for school activities. It's not required for the Optimus Swim because Optimus Swim is district in it. So it's only if we open up on a weeknight just for mom and the kids and dad and the kids to come in and use it.
But you're saying the floor, just help me with this, you're saying the floor now has a minimum depth of 5 foot without the,
The floor that goes in right now takes it from 5 foot to 3'6" of the depth.
so without putting in this adjustment for it, it's at 5 foot.
It's at 5 foot.
So it's even compliant with the 5 foot, because that's the minimum, without having the floor put in.
But if you open it to the general public, general swim, they're saying it falls under whatever rule. that
Some other code, right?
3'6". So if you read on the letter from Samantha Fiskus,
But I don't,
it's not required as long as the pool is not open for open swim.
well, I know, I saw that, but what I'm trying to see here is, doesn't it say the 5 foot is the criteria, not 3'6"?
As long as it's not open to open swim.
Now, when I talked to them, what they stated was, for school activities and all that, 5 foot is fine. If you do it for open swim, then you have to have 3'6" as a depth. So when I talked to Glenn, he told me the same thing. And I think when the pool initially got ramping up, it was gonna be open to the public, and that's when they went back and put that, for the variance for that floor system.
So what do they mean by open swim?
General public. Kind of like what Muskego does. Anybody in Muskego or anybody can go and pay a $3 or $4 fee and you can go use
Yep.
their pool.
Ski go have a 3'6" floor?
4 foot.
4 foot, so they're not compliant
Theirs
either.
was just built last year. So again, like I said, I don't know where this whole 3'6" truly came from. Talking with the state inspector, Tony, he said it shouldn't even been allowed to be built with aluminum because it corrodes so fast.
Yeah.
It should have been stainless steel. Well, now try putting a stainless steel floor.
It's unsafe to put it in. I mean, I talked to Blaine on it, and he said it's just too dangerous.
Yeah, if you look at the pictures in that packet further back, you can see how corroded it is.
But he just says it's just, he brings in the divers to help put the
Yep, I've never
dive in.
seen it. Chad's.
Yeah.
Have you done some diving to help put it in
No, I
yourself? No?
Actually, you can ask Blaine about that.
Yeah, his team volunteers actually do that, so.
Yeah, it's pretty tough, but no, he said he doesn't really think it's a safe thing to use. Even if it was in good condition, he wouldn't consider it safe. So it's not the right approach. Even if it was brand new, it wouldn't be the right approach.
Plus going back, one of the things in your packet is a memo from Bob Buckles when this was all created. I think what we did is we bought this thing and then we modified it as a school district, which I do not recommend that in this case. So to me, that's just another reason why we should abandon this floor. It's really what do we feel like we need to do to replace it or not replace it.
Mr. Como?
Takes 54 man-hours just to remove it.
Correct.
18 people working for 3 hours.
And that's volunteers from Express Swim or Blaine's group, coaches.
So how often have they been doing this?
For quite some time now, well before I was here.
Is it twice a year?
Yes, typically it's 2 to 3 times a year that it goes in and comes out.
Yeah.
For curriculum of maybe a week to 3 weeks, so.
So they went for a variance back in December of 2004, so I don't know when the floor was purchased. It was almost a $50,000 expense.
But now we're okay to do that curriculum at the 5-foot depth,
As long as
is
you-
what I
Yeah,
understand.
according to the state, as long as you
Okay.
don't use it for open swim. They asked me, what is it typically used for? I said, really, it's a competition pool, because if you look at the hours that Express uses that pool,
And even isn't it, my kids swam in it years ago, the Optimus Swim event, they don't have it in for
They do not know.
the elementary kids when they have their big district-wide. It's not even in for that.
Well, I'm interested in defining what open swim is, because the problem is that a lot of that pool is paid for on community service levy. And part of the justification for doing it on community service levy is that it would be open to the public. Now, does that mean that we can't open it for specific programs like water aquatics? You know, those types of things. Because open swim to me means, open swim means one, come all, versus we can have an aquatics program for seniors or anybody, doesn't really matter. So I'm kind of curious what open swim is. We obviously can't do what we've been doing because it's too unsafe. Right. According to Blaine, it's just unsafe.
And is there panels that don't sit flush?
Yeah. And
Every year, we have someone that comes forward with an injury related to that floor.
yeah, we
So-
can't have a safety problem like that. I mean, we'll have to find a better solution than that if we have to do something.
Blaine couldn't be here tonight. I originally hoped he'd be here for his contract, but also to really talk about this. He had talked about some ideas where within the express swim umbrella that they could join the kind of express silver sneakers type of, that way it's not open to the public, but anyone could join this. So I think there's ways to, like, I think the
Yeah.
point Kurt's getting at is having open swim without just opening the doors and.
Because it's not, people aren't using it like open swim. I mean, it just doesn't get used that way. I mean, we could make it a community valued pool without having it be an open swim pool, the way I'm,
If you're part of a club, according to the state, then you're part of that swim club. It's not general public, you're part of the club.
And we could offer true open swim. Now,
Which we don't offer right now.
I
We
just
offer
don't,
open swim right now?
I just don't, in my conversations with Blaine, this is going back a ways, there's not much going
there was
on.
supposed to be open swim certain hours.
Did
They
we
made
ever
it-
do that?
Well, the hours are such that people didn't
There were
come.
two
Like 10 to
individuals
midnight?
that would come in the morning, I guess, and swim.
Oh, okay.
But Blaine said he can just have them join his organization, become part of the Express Senior.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They can
I
come
mean,
and do their laps.
it would be interesting at open swimming, because I know Carol has open swim, and I can guarantee you that pool, I mean, that pool is, in the field house is old. So I wonder how they, and I know that a lot of people utilize the
Unless they're
open swim at Carol.
grandfathered?
Maybe, I don't know. But I know that there's a lot of people that use Carol's for open swim, because I hear a lot of grumbling about the temperature of that pool. So I know, because I'm involved a little bit with Carol, that they have a lot of people that go and swim there. So I don't know how.
And my conversation with Blaine is they don't have much open, now,
Yeah, I know,
whether it's
right, I've
scheduling
never-
or what, I don't know the answer to that, but
You have two other pools that
Right.
could easily open up.
Yeah,
if you
right,
wanted.
exactly.
West has got a built-in ramp going down.
Yep.
North really isn't utilized that much except by the school. There's
Right.
really not. South is just basically, to me, is Express. They're in there 24/7.
Yeah, it's. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's
Open
a simple thing. We can't do what we were doing. We don't have a present need to do anything different, but we do have a requirement to make it accessible to the community. And I think Blaine's proposal is along the right direction to go in doing that without having open swim. So, more like that, the better.
so we'll take this conversation and we'll eliminate the existing temporary floor, and then maybe we'll do a follow-up report just to let you know where we ended up.
I would like to know if I can get rid of the old floor that we've kind of been hanging on to that we're not going to put back in and free up space.
Get a recycle value out of it. It's aluminum.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
When you have a big gymnastics or basketball and you get
Right.
a pool, we got to take it and push it all the way out into the hallway, and it's, if we don't need it, and you're agreeing, I'd like
Dispose of it.
It's not going back in.
Yeah.
Brian,
why
check.
are we
What does
keeping
get rid of it mean? Does another school want it? Okay, you're gonna scrap
I would
it? You
never
wanna
give it to
scrap it for
anybody else.
aluminum? So you're gonna scrap it for aluminum?
it'll be your next roll of aluminum foil.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was over there a while back and Blaine had told me that it was just way too, he said, he was very clear that it wasn't safe to use it.
Can't take action, but
No, we got some guidance, that's what we were looking for.
And the original reviewer is no longer with the state, so I couldn't
Oh,
talk to him.
Maybe the swim team will have a little party, they don't have to put the floor in anymore. Celebration.
Probably better to use carbon fiber, don't you think?
In a pool.
Yeah.
Give the swimmers some little stilts about that tall.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Anything else for our pool people? Okay, this is wonderful. We are moving right along. Hoping to get done before 7, but I asked for an extra item to be added to the discussion item tonight. That was the school resource officers, just to bring the committee up to date. Otherwise, it won't be on the agenda. Mr. Clark?
Yeah, just to provide a little bit of background information. If you recall, our current arrangement with SROs is one at each high school, and then there's one officer that's shared at the middle school level, and I think we're in our second year of that. We've had discussions with the city about expanding from 4 to 6 officers, and anytime you reopen an agreement, it reopens an agreement. So we really couldn't come to a financial agreement with them, at least at this point. So Joe Cook and I, and Joe, if you want to come up and maybe fill in any holes I forget, have been looking into some viable viable is a very subjective term, alternatives, including contracting out those final 2 slots. We still have 2 years left under our current SRO agreement with the city. So we've done a site visit, we've done phone calls to...
4 officers.
Yeah. We've done phone calls to districts that have gone as far as forming their own security forces, et cetera. But we're really looking, just to update you on where we are, but also get some feedback on, are any of these ideas of interest, and how do you want us to proceed? Are we comfortable with 4 officers? Are we, is our goal really to get to 6 as fast as we can, and those types of things? So, Joe, I don't know if you want to, or if you have anything to add.
I think what you should add is there's a lot of issues that you're digging into before we make a alternative move. I mean, we have to look at job descriptions if we're going to have our own contracted people, and we have to look into liability insurance and whether those officers could or would be sworn officers deputized in an event that the city or the county would want them deputized. So there's a whole bunch of issues. It's not an easy, simple, let's go do this. We want to make sure we check all these things first before we head down the path of maybe having an alternative solution to the officers, but there's just a lot of little pieces of the puzzle, right?
Correct, and I was at a conference last week, it was a student services conference, and there was a sectional put on by the Department of Justice, which adds another layer to it with all the safety grant funding and the new state level acts that have been put in place around school safety. So we've got calls in now to the Department of Justice to begin to talk to them about this as well.
And then the other item is, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but Darren had indicated that community service levy is being used to fund some of this, or is it not?
The funding plan for the 4th officer was funded through and via the community service fund.
So I have a question whether that's really allowable, because that officer is not for community service, that officer is for our schools. Usually community service is when the broader community is benefiting from the service this district is providing. So I want to...
They actually do. I mean, basically, those officers are available. It's almost like a substation. If there's an emergency outside of the school, they go. So technically, they're serving our school. I mean, they're located at our school, but they're also serving the community when it's necessary for them to go to an emergency.
Well, I mean, we may have that opinion, but I'm kind of curious what DPI says about it myself. I mean, certainly we've ran into community service levy issues before where, the pool is an example where people protested how we use that levy, and not that I really want to take it out of my own budget or out of our other budgetary items, but I also want to make sure that we're not misusing that levy because that has other implications.
We are required, there's been so many changes in Fund 80 that we are required to report out what's budgeted in there. meaning a secretary, and we've not gotten any questions from DPI or our auditor on the community service levy. Through that reporting, I'm not saying,
Well, I just think
My
it'd be
interpretation.
more, I'd feel more comfortable if we were more proactive and we asked DPI specifically if this is an acceptable expenditure for community service levy. Not trying to cause trouble, but I don't want to be called on the mat either.
Sure.
They may or may not tell us, but they may refer us, asking our auditors to provide that.
Wait,
My question would be where the funds would come from for the fifth and sixth officer. As you see headlines like the district to drop their sheriff's deputy for fiscal reasons in Kettle Moraine after their, referendum failed. Where's the money coming from when we're laying off other people to hire new SROs?
well, I think right now the intent would be to get that money through the community service levy. I just want to make sure that the community service levy is an appropriate place to get that money. If not, then it comes out of our general budget, which, means that we're not using to educate kids. But I think the board has been consistent is that we want these officers. It's just how much we're going to pay for them. I think that's been a consistent message I've received from the board. And how do we go about paying for them is the next question. If it's community service levy, it's a lot easier. But if it's not, then it comes out. Mr. Como?
Yeah, I think part of what's driving this is we were looking at that fourth SRO being spread too thinly across all three of our middle schools. So I think we were saying, hey, why don't we add two so that we can have one SRO at each of our middle schools. And that's what's driving this. I don't think we ever gave you guys a time frame that we had to actually have this done by. I think probably it was interpreted, let's get it going for the next year. But I think we do have to look at cost versus services. The current contract, though, for the 4, that's good for 2 more years. Is that correct?
Runs through 2021.
So, unless there's something else driving it, we can take our time on these other 2 and trying to figure out what is the best approach. And I would assume that we're going to include the city in those discussions too.
The city hasn't been very flexible, but we aren't no one's excluding the city. It's just that they haven't been very flexible. They've been asking for a certain amount and without much variance. And if you look at the Kettle Moraine situation, the cost of that county sheriff is actually quite high, in line with what the city's asking. But if we're successful in navigating this, if we can dot all the i's and cross all the t's, we could probably come up with a much more cost-effective solution at a higher level of services that might actually benefit Kettle Moraine too, if they decide that they still want a school resource officer, but they don't want to pay $85,000, which I can understand why the county's charging that, because it's a county police force isn't the same as a city police force, right? Mr. Como.
Do we know what percentage of those 4 SROs in the current contract, what percentage of their total compensation we're paying for?
52, 53?
No. I want to say right now it's like 47 or 48%. We had had conversations. If you just look at the calendars and you do student contact days, it's 65% of the calendar days. The city wants that, and if I was them, I would probably be asking that because it makes some logic. But if you factor in that, when this all started, I remember the COPS grant, and that's how the first 3 officers got in place. Back then, it was also a viewpoint of, the city has to respond to our schools regardless. So the 65% is, in my mind, high, and I actually follow that line of thinking. City's been pretty adamant about the 65%. I think I've offered 52 and 55, somewhere in that range, not much success. So, and then once that happened, it kind of all of a sudden, what are our options? Let's take some time because there's nothing pressing us to do this. let's take some time, look at some options and do some research. And that's kind of what led us to this conversation.
And are we looking at, is part of your research looking at what other school districts are doing too? I mean,
I can tell you, and I think it goes.
I have no clue how many schools. I'm
Vast
assuming
majority
most
of them are
schools,
using
most high
their-
schools have SROs, is
Yes.
what my assumption
I think
is. I mean, I don't know if that's correct.
It's the norm, at least in Waukesha County and southeastern Wisconsin. Whether they're served by a county, the sheriff's department or their
Private.
local municipality, that's probably the biggest variance.
There are some school districts that employ their own safety staff, but again, it's unarmed. So the Milwaukee Public Schools, I believe Madison Public has safety staff on board, but it's more like, I would say, hallway monitors that have been given some advanced training. Again, it's not armed security in those locations. In the conversations that I've had with other districts, when you start going down the road of actual armed security in schools, they've deferred to either the police department or the sheriff's department. I've not found any public school districts that are using armed security.
Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin. When I did talk to Texas, I talked to a police chief in Texas who
Public
has.
or private?
What's that? Public school district.
Public school districts.
When I'm referring to
are not-
Wisconsin, public school districts.
Okay.
When they have security, that has been through police, so it's police or sheriff's department.
Okay.
I spoke with a police chief in Texas who shared with me that there are 250 school districts in Texas that have created their own police departments. Not security, not armed security, not anything. It is actually a police department, but boards of education in Texas have the statutory authority by resolution to create their own police department.
Do we?
We do not have that here.
Not that you have to have it, but we're checking it from the liability point of view with our insurance. That's
Right,
really our
and-
biggest issue, I think.
And so how do you go about categorizing? Is it police or is it armed security in your school? And how do you go about categorizing that? There's going to be a statutory definition in Wisconsin of what it means to be a law enforcement officer, with your licensing and so on and so forth. And so we're looking into what that means in Wisconsin. Now, the UW system has their own police on campus. Marquette, through an act of the state legislature, Marquette has their own police department on campus. But there are no other entities in the state that have the ability to do that, to create their own police department. So when you start going down the conversation of having armed security on campus, that's where we're getting into the conversations with our attorneys, with our insurance company, with the Department of Justice as a layer to that, making sure that what we do gives us the protection and the support that we need on a day-to-day basis in the district.
So let's just go with Marquette. I mean, because I know Marquette. In fact, they offered to come to the committee and talk to us after Mr. McCaffrey asked me about them, and so I called the people I knew at Marquette. They wanted a police force because they want to be able to patrol outside the perimeter of the campus. So they are allowed to go outside the perimeter of the campus because they're sworn officers under the Department of Justice.
They can chase people. Or
They
whatever.
can ticket, they can arrest, they can cuff people. They said the problems are not just inside our campus, but they're actually outside our campus. And they didn't want to be constrained under the sheriff or the city. They wanted to have their own people that they could select, they could hire, kind of like in a way we'd like to have. And so Rana, who's I know from Marquette, she was willing to bring an officer here. I guess a couple of them are from Waukesha. Bring an officer here and explain to us why they did that, what they see as the benefits of that from their perspective. That still doesn't solve our issues that Joe's looking into and Darren's looking into as to whether we can actually do this or not. So we're not rushing to have that done right now. Bring them in to tell us about that till we find out some more information.
I'm just. What do you mean by kind of like we want to have? I'm not sure what that is right now. Because this is really the first time we're talking through a lot of this.
Well, I think what we want to have is more services at a lower price. Okay? And right now, we don't have any control over who we receive, and we have no control over what they actually do.
Who we receive in terms of
officers.
being an officer, okay.
And we have no control over what they actually
I thought
do
we
or don't do.
participate, don't we?
No control. All we do is get the right to talk to them. Even the current contract, they've eliminated language like collaborate. They'll communicate to us what they're going to do, but they won't collaborate with us. So it's not what I would call conducive to, and that's what Rana is going to talk to us, would have talked to us about, is that she sees the huge benefit of having kid-oriented officers that are specifically hired for that reason. And that's kind of what they did down in Texas. That's why they went
Is
away
that the
from
Marquette person, Ron, or Rhonda?
No, Ron.
Ron, you said?
Rana.
Rana?
Kurt, can you, what did you say? Right now, we have no control over who we get as an officer and what else?
And what they do or don't do when they're on our school grounds.
If I could just add to that, when I was on the phone with the,
Don't we have policies about that?
Oh, well,
Govern the
And
Waukesha
then
Police
cannot
Department.
tase or whatever, all of that?
no.
We cannot say what they can or cannot do on our property.
And
so-
there's reasons for that, because, you know, they're union officers and they need one command structure, to be honest with you. They want to know who's giving the commands, and that's the chief of police. So I can understand why they have those, but still,
Well, what do we not do or don't allow that conflicts with the law?
So I don't think that it's a matter, I think that, so I guess if I could just share, when I talked to the police chief down in Texas, I mean, it legitimately is a police department under the authority of the Board of Education and the administration of the school district in Texas. So when you think of what would be a police department in Wisconsin, the police reports to the Fire and Police Commission, who reports to the mayor, or whoever is in charge of the municipality in those areas. In Texas, the school board and the administration has full control over that. So I think when you get into the selection, it's the district that really does have that. In the Waukesha process, the police department has a hiring process where if an officer is eligible to apply for a transfer, because being a police liaison officer, there's an application for that. Ryan Patt and I sat in on the last round of interviews where I think we interviewed 9 or 10 candidates to fill for the replacement position at West, and then the additional officers, so to create a five officer priority, a pool of potential SROs. And so we did sit in on that interview committee, but again, we didn't hire the officers from the minute that they became police in the city. We were part of the selection for the positions that would be in the Waukesha schools. As far as controlling what an officer does, you know, the idea of tasing or using other types of force, there are certain things that fall within the scope of a police officer's abilities, I guess, and whether that's in Wisconsin or Texas, those are statutorily created at the state level that give the police officer that authority. And so if you have police, those police are allowed to do certain things. The police on Marquette grounds are able to use those same devices as the police in the city of Waukesha. But I think when you get into that philosophical conversation around why are the officers here, what's the mission, I think that's where you get into a little bit of difference as to when Marquette, based off of what was said and what I read and the conversations I've had around how Marquette got to their place, they really wanted to create a university police. Whereas in school districts, you're working with the local law enforcement agency to provide your law enforcement support.
So I'll give you an example. I mean, it so happened Vice had a school resource officer. That's how we found out about the Texas thing. They had a film of the officer grabbing the kid by the throat and throwing him to the ground. Seen as perfectly appropriate. It was all on film. But if we had a teacher do that in our school, that teacher would be terminated, right? If they grabbed the kid by the throat and threw him to the ground. But the officer, because he's a police officer, he was able to grab the kid by the throat and say, well, you know, it's within our acceptable guidelines. So that's the difference between having what we'd want to have from our school environment versus and I think that's why they moved away from having outside police officers in Texas and letting the school board control that more. Go ahead, Mr.
So is our research, are we trying to improve our services and save costs? I think you said both.
Yes.
Do we know what the delta is in cost savings between what the city is offering versus some of the private organizations? And is that delta warrant all the research that we're doing with the attorneys?
Part of the issue with that is we met with a firm and they seem very good, but they also want to know, what are you going to ask us to do? What do you want? Are we armed or unarmed? Are we, you have this authority with these people, but I'm not going to bid on something unless it gets down to job description, those types of things, because obviously if we're asking more of them, you pay for services generally.
So to answer your question, Mr. Como, I mean, it's probably a $30,000 saving per officer, $20,000 to $30,000 whenever they get around to writing a job description and then bidding it. The difference is the officer's there the full school day, never leaves the building, and can be reassigned to any building at our discretion because they're a contracted officer for us. So,
we would gain control.
We'd gain control.
Did we lose anything by moving away from the?
Not if they're armed. I mean, and I think the intent would be for them to be armed. We wouldn't lose anything, and we'd be able to write policies into how those officers are used and how they're to be assessed. And then when we want to replace an officer, it's pretty easy. We just tell them to send you a different one. We're not happy with this one.
So we would include things like I know there's some teaching that goes on. Those things would be included. Any of the emergency kinds of things that we have set up, emergency procedures, are we dependent upon the police for a certain level?
I think Mr.
On
Cole
what
would
those
answer
emergencies
that.
are? Or?
When we've adopted and created practices that, I mean, in the event, say the tragedy happened.
Developed all the procedures.
Say the tragedy were to happen, we'd have to make sure that everybody was on the same page when the tragedy happens. And we could certainly sit down and review what's been in place, but regardless of whatever firm we had in place, be it we extend it with the police or we contract out, I would want to make sure that everybody has a uniform understanding of how we are operating. And no one side is going to outweigh the other. We need to make sure that it's practical and operating, because when the police arrive, and they would be the primary, after this person responded, the police would be on scene. We would want to make sure that there was absolute understanding and coordination between the groups in that regard. So that would be a must for us.
So let's just take, for instance, let's say we had a breach. And let's say if it was a coordinated breach, where they knew that if I take something over here, that officer's going to leave that building because they're going to react to something over here, and then the second party would come in, and then the school would be undefended because that officer went over here to the distraction.
Oh, you're saying currently?
Currently, because that could happen. Officers leave our building all the time to respond to a call, right? So with the dedicated police officer, that's ours, he wouldn't be leaving to respond to that call. He would stay in that building. So the other part of it is, if it's a dedicated police officer, he's there because he's there to immediately respond to the threat. Hopefully, he's successful in immediately responding to the threat long before the police ever show up, just like as if we had another officer there. If he's unable to respond to the threat, or if he's unsuccessful to respond to the threat, chances are he's not available to respond after that because he's made his effort. So then it relies on the police officers that arrive, just as in a normal situation, abnormal situation. But certainly we gain very little by focusing on one solution only, which is the city, versus looking at alternative solutions. It just takes a little bit more time and effort. And I'll say, Mr. Cook and Mr. Clark have put a lot of time and effort into this, and I just want to make sure we update the committee on it.
So are we looking at a hybrid scenario, or are we looking at an all or nothing scenario with whatever we choose?
Well, right now, we're contractually obligated to stay with the city at the high school and one middle school officer for the next
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
So if, let's say everything rolled out in September 1, we have 6 officers, and we chose, it could be a blended, 2 of contracted and 4, WPD officers.
I didn't understand something that Joe said. You said something about a bust. I don't know what you meant by, you said this would be a bust. You made those words just a little while ago, and I didn't understand what you meant by that.
Rewind the tape, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not,
We were talking about the emergency scenarios, and
if there were emergency scenarios, everybody would have to be on the same page as to what those are. In my mind, it's a non-starter if both groups are contracted security plus the law enforcement agencies are not on the same page.
Okay.
That's
what you meant
something where
with
we
a
have
bust.
to have an
It would be a
absolute.
bust
It
if
has to
we
be
couldn't
correct.
coordinate.
Correct. It would have to be. We'd have to have absolute clarity because
I got you.
we have intentionally designed that with Waukesha Police and Waukesha Sheriff, so that the response, because they're coming to the school regardless of who it is. If the sheriff is responding, say, to West, and the police they know how to operate together in that scenario. They all are operating off the same procedures.
Gotcha.
We would want our security crew to be on the same page as there.
I understand.
And so would the city. I mean, they're not going to allow us, they're not going to want us to have our own security force without them coordinating their activities with that security force. So it's not like this is going to, they have an obligation to provide for public safety. The city does. They're obligated to serve our schools whether we pay them or not. Unfortunately, they want to be paid to serve our schools because of the school resource officer program. But they're obligated to serve us with services. It's just at what degree do they have the service? And we're saying if you're not willing to service to a degree that we believe is acceptable relative to what we're paying you, then we need to explore other options. Ms. Reincheck.
Who's our contact? Who have we been talking with?
Who
On what?
on what grounds?
Oh.
Private organizations, or?
Yes, let's say the city police and then the county police. Who are we talking with? When you say we're talking with our,
So I work with, at the city level, I work with Captain Tom Wagner and Lieutenant Ty Hoffman. I've had regular conversations with them through the scope of the SRO program. The Texas police chief that I spoke to, I forget the name of this, I think it was the Hutto Unified School District. His name is Chief Edwards. We spoke with,
the ones that we already have, who, sheriff, who are we talking with?
Sheriff's not involved with.
Okay, they're not.
So the sheriff's not part of the SRO discussion, but from a school safety standpoint, we do work with, I work with Captain DeSalt because they cover Rose Glen. And so we work with them through the township in the county. And I do work with those two, the captain and the lieutenant that I mentioned to you.
Hoffman.
So on a regular basis, if there's a call, if there's a question, if anything comes into, those are the two individuals that I talk to, and we speak once a week, once every other week.
Are they aware that we're not completely satisfied?
What's that? Yes, they are. They are aware.
They're willing to do nothing?
With anything that comes down to budget, there are those individuals who set the budget and control the budget. They do not want to walk away from an agreement with the district, but they're also operational folks like I am. We work on the logistics, the day-to-day stuff, making sure that the schools are secure. When it comes down to these interagency contracts, that comes up to that's the higher-ups that discuss those things.
And we should probably clarify that the numbers are rarely in Joe's conversations. I work with the city administrator and his finance director on hitting the financial side of it, I guess.
And there aren't any grants or anything that we can apply for?
Not that I.
Money that we got from the state for school safety, does that go to that?
No.
That was only for physical and professional development, physical upgrades and professional development. It didn't allow to pay for officers.
And what about the hiring process when we say, we don't think this person is good with kids, or this one is a little heavy-handed? We have no say in that, and they can't budge on that either?
It's similar to how we've got staff that work at the jail and the juvenile center, for instance. If the jail staff were to contact me and say, we're having a problem with such and such a teacher, I would hear what they had to say. I would look into it. If it was warranted, I would make an employment change, a staffing change, whatever it might be, if that were needed. We're in the same situation with the police department. If there are concerns with an officer, I can bring that to their higher ups. but we're at the discretion then of what the higher-ups in the police department
And
wants to do.
they're constrained by their union rules too. So to reassign an officer, you would have a union steward say, well, wait a second, for what reason?
And they
Because the
would-
school
happened?
district says they're unhappy, that's not an acceptable reason for them.
We've not had that situation in my time. Again, the SRO program goes back to 99, 2000, 2001, I think. I don't know if any of that happened prior to me being here.
Been here 6 years?
5 years now.
5 years, and we've been okay with everybody in 5 years.
We've had very good performance with
Okay.
the officers that we've had on campus, yes.
My concern, it goes back to the idea of the funding. And if we're going to talk about the community service funds, if they're not a police officer through the city of Waukesha that's being shared with the community, would there be funds to just put them into the schools? To be replacing the city's expectation
You know,
of
we're
taking
asking,
care of that.
I'll just say, we're asking too many questions for what is meant to be just an update. And one of the reasons why we don't have more people here so you can see the alternative is because until we define that the alternative is viable, through the investigation that Joe and Darren are still doing, it's kind of hard for us to bring people in to say, here's what we're looking at as an option. We're kind of just looking at one side of the coin. Until we have the chance to flip the other side of the coin, we're asking a lot of questions that are kind of premature at this point. I'm the one that asked for the update tonight, not Joe and Darren, because I felt the committee.
Discussion, no?
I did think the committee, there's nothing wrong with discussing it, but I will say that it's kind of a one-sided discussion because we're not quite ready with all the answers yet. I think we have a job description that's being worked on. We haven't even gotten a bid in from a third-party supplier. And Joe's done a great job of collecting information. Ms. Ronichek?
But what Darren said was we can't get a bid without knowing if they should or should not be armed. I will tell you as a parent, if I know that a police officer has a weapon around my child and is going to defend them, I'm okay with that. But if there's another group of people that are going to be armed around my kid, I have to trust that. And right now, as a board member, I don't even trust that. And as a parent, they're trusting us to make sure that their kids are safe. So there's a long list of discussion that we need to have before we can get a bid, right?
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, what you need is to get a bid. You have to see what's being made available to you, and then then your concerns, whether they're still there or not, maybe they won't be there.
So what Darren said is wrong?
No,
Okay, are they armed or are they not?
I believe they'll be armed.
That's your opinion.
You asked me a question, I answered it. I believe they'll be armed.
Okay. Darren, do you need to know that answer before you get the bid process to sending out the RFP?
I envision coming back to a committee now, whether FNF's the right one or whatever, that's whole, with a job description and us agreeing on the scope of services. I'm not going to bid out something on, I mean, this is definitely a board topic, or its committees. I would want, consensus on, yes, Darren, this is the scope of services we're looking at. This is, it gets down to, in talking with this contracting firm, what do you want them to look like? Casually dressed? Do you want them to look like police? I mean, it gets down to how are we going to, if we were to pursue this, how are we going to roll it out? So we really would have to work through all of those things, in my mind, to get a firm RFP response. We'd have to be able to tell them exactly, because in Wisconsin, this is a new thing. It's not like they're in 30 other schools and they can roll out these examples of this is how you can do it. And we're kind of on the front edge of considering something like this, in my knowledge of it.
This is a first for public school systems in Wisconsin. And we've had some good, and I tell the committee that we've had some excellent contacts to discuss this topic with.
Mm-hmm.
We don't feel that we've never left a meeting or left a phone conversation where we don't feel like we've been given a lot of information. But I think from the committee or from the whole board, it's a big shift in how we would go about doing business. What is an accepted model in Wisconsin, which is the SRO type program, to going to an armed security service to provide you that. And that's, I think, something that I agree with what Kurt is saying, that there are other options out there, and we've seen some good ones. I also hear what you're saying, Karen, about this, this could have a parental impact. That's how do parents perceive this type of decision? And that's why when Darren and I do think about job descriptions, scope of duties, we'd like to know what it is that you guys are, as a committee, are looking for to give us some feedback so that we can get into those weeds. Because if we go down this bidding process and we get bids and we get interest, how do we go about, is that something then that we communicate do we do focus groups with families to hear what families have to say? Is it something that we survey? Is that information that you as a committee or as a board would like to get?
It shouldn't be this complicated. We're making it way more complicated than it needs to be. I mean, if they're not armed, we probably won't do it. That's pretty simple. I mean, you're not going to make the schools safer without armed officers there. Until we meet the recommended party, this committee's not going to feel comfortable for something they haven't seen and touched. I mean, I understand that, where Ms. Reinachek's coming from. But if they're not armed, we're probably not going to do it because we want that type. If we can get better service at a lower cost, then just because we're the first ones to get better service at a lower cost doesn't mean we don't do it. Ms. Reinachek.
I know you guys feel comfortable with it because you've sat in on things. Is there something that we can see? Is there a commercial of some sort that shows, okay, this is who we are, this is how long we've been in business, these are the backgrounds of these people that we will send to you. These are referrals from places who have had them. However you feel comfortable, can you bring us that comfort level by bringing us a taste of what you've seen?
Once we get to the point where we're ready to bring that forward, the reason I wanted to give you an update is that we're not to that point yet.
Okay.
We're not to the point to bring the right type of people forward for you to consider. There will be no contract approval of someone like this without this committee meeting the people that we're going to do the contract with, or proposing to do the contract with.
This is, as I mentioned before, this is definitely
Your
a board thing.
Your concerns are 100% legitimate, Ms. Reinachek. I would not feel comfortable bringing a group towards you without having this committee meet that group. And I don't think Mr. Cook and Mr. Clark would feel comfortable.
Not at all.
And this is a big enough change where the whole board should be involved, not just this committee.
Well, we have a 5-person committee for a reason. We have a working committee for a reason. Whether the full board approves the contract, I agree with that, okay?
This is a big change.
Yes, but whether the full
Potential
board...
change.
Yeah, potential change.
It's beyond.
This is getting to the point where we're talking about the unknown, like the boogeyman's out there, and we don't need to talk about all the details till we get to that point.
So we need some more time.
That's what we're saying. It takes some more time.
How often do the police leave our buildings? Do we have any idea? I know we have an idea how many times they come to our buildings.
Yeah.
Do we have any
So-
idea how many times they leave?
I've worked with our principals and I've worked with the police department. Some of our SROs are out about once a month for formal training.
Okay.
And occasionally to respond to a call. There are a handful of Waukesha police on the streets every single day in squads. They're the ones that you'll drive by going to and from. From time to time, if there's something in the neighborhood of the school, somebody would leave. Some officers who have been involved in the SRO program have been off campus more because of other training type obligations, or if they've done an arrest and have to appear in court. I think one of the things to talk to the police about, talk to the city about is, what type of sub coverage would we get in the event of absences? Because that, I think, would be important if there's somebody who's regularly going to be out for training, somebody else regularly gets into that position. I would say that when we did that interview to fill the West, because the prior SRO got a promotion, we did look at having 5 officers in the pool of SROs that would then act as subs in longer term situations. So if somebody were injured, family, expands, they have a baby, we'd have somebody that then could fill in. On day-to-day absences, we don't always get that. And that is part, I think it should be part of the discussion that we have with the city within the scope. On the other hand, we've got teachers who, when they're absent, we may not always be able to fill those positions as well. And you guys have seen that through the sub-conversations at the HR committee, for instance, and you try to Band-Aid coverage for classrooms, so.
Yeah, I have a hard time paying for a cop when he's not there, so. How are we with the negotiations? I mean, what is the cost breakdown about the amount of time that the police are in our buildings compared to their salary and benefits that we're paying for?
I think that's something that we have to work on.
Right.
Depending on the number of days, actual days are in our building and
Yep.
actual days not. I think that could change some things. I'm looking to meet with the city manager and kind of go through some of those options and see if there's some
Okay.
room there to,
Right. Because for me, I mean, obviously the preferred option is the police, but, I mean, it's just not a blank check to the Waukesha Police Department, unfortunately.
Yeah, when you get into security, it's a hard thing to.
The other issue is that they're charging us a premium. I mean, it's kind of like we used to have the excuse at eAchieve that our cost numbers are bad because we're using our most senior teachers. Well, I mean, the reality, your cost numbers are your cost numbers. And what they're doing because of the union status and all that, we're getting a fairly high-ranking officer to basically sit.
Yeah.
Is that really the right level of compensation an officer we need for that position? Well, that's what we're going to get because that's the way that, this is a step to their promotion, right? And so when they are asking for $85,000, that's not the normal $45,000, $50,000 police officer that.
Right.
Is that a senior level officer?
Is that what they're asking for?
What's that?
How much are we paying per officer right now?
Sorry, I'm not texting. I'm doing some math for you.
Are you texting it to me?
55 now, isn't it?
I mean, I think that
Right now, we pay almost $54,000 per officer.
for 178 days contracted time, or how many days is it?
The student contact days.
About 180 days a year.
180 days.
A plus or
Yeah.
minus a few things on the beginning and in the end of the year, and a few special events like prom,
Is
graduation.
that included in the contract? So, for instance, when the police officers are at the football games,
No, that's billed separately.
That's billed
it's
separate.
billed separately.
Yes.
Okay. So we're looking at 55 Gs for 178 or 180 days of contact time with students, right?
Salary benefits,
Yes,
yes.
salary. How much are the two new ones? Is it the same price?
The way the contract's written right now, and this goes back to the COPS grant, we pay $30,000 apiece for each high school officer.
Okay.
And we pay, trying to do the math here, the remainder, we pay a higher percentage of the middle school, but really that conversation was about percentage of the whole SRO program. But we were already contractually obligated under the high school.
Right.
So it's broken out that way because that's the way the COPS grant worked at the time. But
Yep.
really, when we're talking with the city, it's a percentage of total compensation for the 4 or 6 officers or whatever number we're targeting at the time.
Do we think it's a fair representation
If you look
of
in
their compensation?
if you look in last month's F&F packet, there was a survey of
Yep.
what district, and it's all over the place.
Yeah, I did-
From
that's what I
0
mean.
to 100%.
I'm asking if you think it's fair. Compared to what a police officer would make, salary and benefits, at 180 contact days, are we being overcharged, or is it undercharged, or, which obviously you're not going to say we're undercharged, or is it what you think it should be? Because, like I said, I like the police officer being in the building, but because it's another government agency, I don't think we should be overcharged. I mean, that just doesn't work for me. So, I mean, I would love to see those numbers if you guys think we're being overcharged, or we're being charged what we should be charged.
It's like art and beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder of whether you feel you're being overcharged. We're not an outlier, but the bookends are here and here.
Right.
And we're kind of.
But we know what they're making.
The city? Yeah, it's
Cops.
the cops, we base our financial conversations off of $115,000 per officer.
Okay.
That must be their average, I'm assuming.
Must be.
So that's the benchmark that we're measuring from.
Another quick concern of mine, like Mr. O'Brien said, is, I mean, we're getting these high level, and it's part of their promotion scale, obviously. So obviously the
could be.
promotion, that tour of duty is at a higher level police officer. I mean, I find that odd.
That I don't know how
I mean,
that all
I
works.
would love to know more. I mean, everybody's interested in what we're going to do with the security coming up, but I would love to know.
So I don't know all the ins and outs of like what it takes to
Yeah.
be eligible to write for a position.
Yeah.
But you need to be in good standing with the police department in order to write for a position. And I can say that after having sat in on the interviews where you had individuals with 3 or 4 years of experience,
Yeah.
and then you had individuals with, that 6, 7 to 10 years of experience,
Yeah.
there was a stark difference in the candidate. Not that the younger folks were bad,
Right.
but when you start looking at how do you handle situations with kids, how do you handle situations with parents, the number of experiences a person has going into the judgment that they have to make when they engage someone, you could tell that based off of how those interviews were conducted, and it was a pretty comprehensive questioning. It wasn't just, tell me the statute number, resuscitation of fact. It was really give us the thought process. The individuals who performed better in those were individuals who generally had more experience, right? And it wasn't that you were looking at 30 years of experience, but it was, based off of what we saw, that 7 to 10 year range appeared to show that there was more. Again, I don't know what it took to be eligible for it. I'm sure there was performance evaluation along the way, recommendation from others, your supervisor in the department, if you could write for it or not, how many times you had changed positions in the department up to it. But there was a difference in candidate at that point.
Professionalism and
It's similar to how you would interview. I would say it's similar to what you look for, with teachers. I mean, if you as a district decide to adopt a cheap teacher model where you're going to hire people within their first 3 years, whatever, regardless, you're going to get 3 years of experience when you hire teachers. The same thing I think held true when we looked at these SRO positions.
So I have a job description that was drafted by one of the candidates we're looking at. We are seeking candidates who are devoted to overseeing the safety of schools as well as building relationships within the community. The minimum education for the position is a high school diploma or GED, 5 years of work experience in law enforcement in a traditional law enforcement agency or school environment. And any equivalent combination of education, experience, or training that is prepared to incumbent to perform the essential duties of the position. And about the position, this position is an academic year 10-month position. The schedule of work is X number of hours per week. The schedule would be 0 a.m. to 0 p.m. The position works very closely with the Waukesha County School District Administration and local law enforcement. Why Waukesha? The Waukesha County School District is comprised of a diverse group of students from all over Waukesha County who come together to create a culture that supports individual and community growth. The Waukesha County School District is committed to prepare all their students for a variety of post-secondary educational career opportunities in addition to academic success. The Waukesha County School District cares deeply about the health and well-being of every student and offer a variety of supports to ensure their success. And on the selection process,
Where'd you get that from?
one of the people was going to try and write a job description. You've received a draft of this, I believe.
Yeah, Darren and I have a copy of what was proposed.
And the company is
Skeleton.
ProTech Security Solutions. It utilizes a behavior-based interview format for the first interview. Candidates are highly encouraged to research this interview style and prepare accordingly. The Waukesha County School District may also use a panel interview process to ensure the right candidate is chosen for the environment. The selected candidate will be subject to a background check.
School district doesn't exist.
Huh? Well, that school district does it in the south of the Mason-Dixon line because school districts in the south are county-wide, which is where they get their police forces from. But when are we talking to the city next? I mean, I think that this is great that we're forming different plans, but where are we with police department or, even more important, our city fathers?
I think that it's more with the
Waiting.
financial side on this one.
Yeah, when's the next time we're talking to them?
There's nothing scheduled. Todd and I have had conversations of reaching out, but I thought we'd wait and see what kind of feedback we might get tonight. But I think a reach out to the cities.
Look,
I guess
we've been down this road with them, and we've encouraged, Mr. Gray has talked to them. They
Yep.
said there will be no movement on the money.
Okay, what you said?
They've said. I don't think they're taking us seriously. I think one of the things that we're missing in this is that Mr. Gray negotiated a 5-year agreement with payment terms on those 5-year agreements, and they want to renegotiate because we want a couple more officers. And that,
Yeah,
to
right.
me, is unacceptable.
Yeah.
they should honor the same rate
Right.
for a couple more officers, and they're saying they will not do that.
And they don't want to do that at all. They do not want to honor the rate that you negotiated with them.
Not at this point, but we have some new information for them, which I want to go back to them with.
And why don't they want to honor those? They feel that they're too low.
They said they can't afford it.
It's a budget thing, just like we talk budget all the time. It's same
We have
conversation.
a different budget though, because we got to go to referendum. Or
No, but I mean, they're saying it's the only.
That's the difference.
The only argument I've heard is
Revenue caps are different
Yeah.
for us.
dollars, financial.
yeah, it's financial.
Nothing
It's not
other than
necessarily budgetary because they could raise my taxes to cover the.
I'm
Yeah,
not
they
going to
can.
pretend to know their limits, but so,
We-
but we
yeah.
can.
Sound check?
Well, I was just doing some math, and I think the problem is the benefits, the benefit package that the union has, if they're still employed, that they will have with the union. But retired officers, they have those packages coming, but they have a lot more time. Retired officers are making roughly $60,000 a year, and they're retired. I know officers that work for the Brewers, it's 25 an hour. I know some others that work in other places as security, it's between 25 and 30. And that's just, they don't need the benefits package, they already have that. So if we had retired officers, we're looking at, did you say 175 days?
I would, for your purposes of your math, I'd say 180 days.
Okay,
Just
well-
because that would cover the full scope of when kids are here.
Okay, I did 175 at 25 an hour, that's 30. And if we gave them $30 an hour, that's 36. That's a lot cheaper than what we're paying. And that's just on top of the salary that they're getting with their package. So have we looked into retired officers?
I think
That have been-
we're still looking at the
We're looking
general
at everything,
concept
right?
first, and there's nothing wrong with looking at retired officers. But again,
There's,
if we go down to retired officer, then we're doing all the work of managing that police force, whereas if we contract to a firm, they're managing the hiring and interviewing and.
And I think there's just two things that I'd mentioned as part of this is that the contracted service, whoever we would contract with, we would want to know how those officers are being trained, how frequently they're being trained, to what standard are they being trained? Because that is hugely important in this conversation. When you get down into some of those decision points that you'd have to make in and around force with kids, in and around kids, communicating with the general public, we'd want to know that that's ongoing. Even if they're retired officers, there's still a level of practice that needs to be in place given their experience, because the farther you get separated from it, the harder it is to do. The other thing is that immediate contact to backup in any way, shape, or form is what is the ability of this contracted agency to communicate, how quickly can they communicate with the police department? Right now, a police officer's got a police radio, they can call it in and they can get back up there. All of the city can respond to one location. Mr. O'Brien mentioned that before. Everybody can respond to one location with one radio. Anybody else beyond that, it's a 911 call, and then how quickly can that get to dispatch, relayed to officers, officers get dispatched? How quickly, or how long is that delay? And what I think we would want to do as part of this exploration is to find out how quickly that could be turned around, because we would be having isolated security folks working at individual schools. Granted, they would be there. Hopefully, they would be armed if that's what the committee and the board wanted to do. But how quickly could they get back up to them in that same situation? And that's something that I think would also require some discussion in and around contract, job description, communication with the city. What does that all look like for us as an organization as well?
I mean, since I know radios and how radios work, I mean, that frequency that our officers would be on can be monitored by the police department just as well as anything. They can sense immediately when there's an active shooter situation based on just monitoring the frequency. The problem with retired officers is training them for an active shooter situation, policies and guidelines, and then also, you might be able to specifically get a set of officers that relate well to our student body. Maybe the retired officers wouldn't, So, we want a lot of control if we change. I mean, part of it is getting a lot of control. And we want a lot of savings. But we still want all the security or more if possible. But we're shooting in the blind until we get this. I read you the job description. I don't think anybody had a problem with that type of job description. That tells you the goals of at least one entity as they're trying to put something together that the school district can build a job description around so they can put in a bid. I can tell you the bid will be close to half what the city's trying to charge us per officer.
Oh, yeah, I can guarantee it's going to be.
Well,
Find out what happens on the next update.
$30 an hour times 1,560 hours in a year.
They're not, they're looking at it as a 10-month position.
I know, but
Yeah.
Yeah, who do we get back the next year is another concern I have. Who do we get back the next year?
As far as an SRO goes?
No, as far as the contractor.
Oh. If we went outside.
Yeah, if we went outside. I mean, I worry about it with the police officers right
I thought you meant the police officers might be going away.
now. No, they're not going away. But, no, like we said, we don't have any control over who we get. You know, we have a good, somebody in there good, and then they're not back the next year. So,
Well, I can say school resource officers are a great thing, and we do want school resource officers to be working with the city police, whether they're city police officers or not, so. Okay, any other questions? I mean, this is really way more than I intended. I
Great
wanted
update,
just a
thanks.
brief update, but we
topic.
got into a lot of depth.
sounds like a work session coming up.
It'd be a long
I
meeting for
heard
the
Joe
full board.
holds great work sessions.
We have great work sessions. Get the whole board involved.
That is possible, Mr.
That's the
Como.
same
We could have a
question.
work session on this with the full board. I never thought about
Once we
that.
get down to it, we're going to need to.
Big topic.
Once we get down to it, we're going to need to have a work session.
We do have a closed session on the back page of the agenda
Yeah, I
that should
saw
only
that.
take
'Cause yeah.
5 minutes.
I'm sorry.
I saw
I
that.
never look at the back page.
We try to keep it to a one-sided
But
agenda.
if he would have adjourned, then we couldn't have.
I just need a very quick,
We have a need to adjourn to executive session. If I could have a motion in that regard, Mr. Como or Mr. McCaffrey
Oh, boy.
or Ms. Lloyd or Ms. Reinacek.
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session.
I'll second.
Okay. This roll call vote.
Ms. Reinacek,
Aye.
Mr. Como,
Aye.
Ms. Voigt,
Aye.
Mr. O'Brien,
Aye.
Mr. McCaffrey.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.